Welcome. Thanks everybody, can you hear me all right? Good, all right. My name is Tim Lapetino and I am here to talk about the year that I spent with Pac-Man. What did I do? In 2020, I spent 365 days with Pac-Man. That sounds kind of creepy. I didn't mean it that way. What I did is I decided that I was going to, every day of the year in 2020, I was going to do something Pac-Man. It was the 40th anniversary of the game. You know, the game came out in 1980. And I thought it would be an interesting thought experiment and actual experiment to actually spend time every single day doing something Pac-Man. Now, if you guys are not familiar, you're here, so you should be familiar with Pac-Man. It's a great midway game, a maze game that kind of changed video games in the sense that it brought different people to the arcades. It brought women to the arcades, it brought young people to arcades. It sort of opened up video games to the popular imagination in a way that other games did not. In the sense that it was an approachable, maze-based game that wasn't super aggressive, but was still very challenging, yet you could, walk up to an arcade cabinet and just play it. So, I'm old enough, older than Pac-Man, old enough to not remember a time when Pac-Man was not part of my life, right? It's always been there in the culture, out there in the ethos. It's been, on the television, it's been around, Pac-Man. And one of the things that I was thinking about this year is like, why? Why does that happen? Why are we still talking about Pac-Man more than 40 years later, and yet we're not really talking about Centipede or, Gallagher or something like that? Like, Pac-Man has this staying power, and so I thought, well, maybe I could sort of figure this out by immersion, right, and spend time every day with Pac-Man. So there's a really obvious question here. Why would anyone do this? Right? Why would you do this? And so I thought this would be an interesting way to celebrate, the 40th anniversary. One of the things that I'm always interested in is pop culture icons. Like, how do the things that persist in our culture, whether it's Mickey Mouse or Pac-Man or the popular conception of Santa Claus, how do those things get here and how do they stay in our culture? So I was fascinated because a couple of years ago I went to my daughter's school. And I said, it's like career day. And I said, what I do? And I write books about video games. And blank stares right there, like, okay, right, what does that mean? And I was like, well, how many of you know who Pac-Man is? All of these 5-year-olds raised their hands. And it was kind of bonkers. It sort of blew me away because I was like, well, I know all of you. I know some of your parents. You don't all have nerdy parents like me, right? And so like, what is it about, how do they know who Pac-Man is? And it's just something that was in the ethos. So I wanted to explore that and do it in a sort of a, almost sociological way, right? So the pandemic also was a big part of this. 2020, we didn't know it at the beginning of 2020, but 2020, we spent a lot of time inside, right? A lot of time inside. So this was in some ways was the perfect sort of antidote to, okay, I have to stay inside. And also, yes, I might actually be insane. So, but I tried it. That's me. If you couldn't tell, I'm less. That's from closer to 2020. I'm a little more gray now than I was then. Those two things are not related, I'm sure. But I decided, okay, I should set up some rules for myself. Like, what were my rules? The rule was I was going to post every single day. I wasn't going to take any days off. I was not going to celebrate holidays in that sense. I was always going to post. I was also not going to preload the posts. Like some people are like, oh, it's so easy, man. You just take one weekend, you just do them all, and then you just post them. That felt like cheating to me. There was a cadence that I wanted to follow, and I could have a plan for the day before, and maybe I can even have like, okay, I'm going to do this game or something, but I wanted to do it then and there. So I wanted to do it live. And because I felt like that was part of the hard thing. That was the, I'm definitely not a super athlete. I run occasionally, but I'm like, this is my Iron Man. I'm like, all right, every day I'm going to do, wake up and I'm going to do a post, right? That was sort of my idea. And then the goal was, because I actually have an actual job, I wasn't going to spend more than an hour every day. That was my goal. And there were some days where I, went over a little bit, but then there was days that I went under, and I tracked this. And at the end of I'll tell you at the end what I did, but I was able to keep it under an average of under an hour. So what happened, and I'll show this, but I want to tell a little bit of it. I played more than 92 games. I stopped counting after that. My kids ate 40-year-old cereal. I did too. I didn't just make them eat it. I didn't get divorced, which was like a bonus, right? You know, it's very important. My wife, you know, she was ready for it to be done probably a couple months before it was actually over. But then I wrote a book. And it just happened that during this time that I was doing this, some of what I was doing was getting noticed, you know, because I did it on social media. Like I had an Instagram account, I had a Twitter account, and they're still up there, so you can check all my math. 365 of Pac. It's both on Instagram and Twitter. I did some of it. I had a Facebook page as well, so I did that too. But while I was doing this, I got reached out to some people who were working on a book about Pac-Man, and so we had long discussions, and ended up being I came on board as the co-author of Pac-Man: Birth of an Icon. So, and shameless plug here. After this, I will be signing books. They're selling them at the ground control booth out there in the the overall space. So if you want to come, we can continue to talk conversation, show you the book, that kind of stuff. But it just happened to be that those things sort of dovetailed. But it was a really great opportunity to sort of preload some of my research, some of the research that I had already been doing by doing this. So sort of breaking out what happened in the year. And I did not have a great plan. I felt like maybe this is just being lazy, but I didn't want to spreadsheet it out and plan every single thing. I had things that I wanted to tackle, and I did have a listing, so I didn't want to miss any major games, right? So what did I do? I tackled Pac-Man, the arcade game. I wanted to make sure I hit all of the arcade games, all the sequels, but then I wanted to dig into the consoles. I wanted to look at the spin-offs, the ones that maybe were a little more obscure. So my goal was to play a version of every single game. Now, if a game was on multiple platforms, I was not obligated necessarily to play every single one. So if I played Miss Pac-Man, I didn't have to play it on the Sega Genesis and the NES and the arcade, but I would try. And if they were demonstrably different, then I would try and play them. So I tried to play everything. And then I sort of opened up this Pandora's box that I started finding bootlegs and knockoffs and things that were sort of Pac adjacent, right? And I really wanted to get a big sense of why you would do that, why you would do some of that. So first, I started out on the very first day. I didn't have a plan except that I was going to go to an arcade and play Pac-Man, and that's what I did. But since it was still sort of like, at least in Chicago, things were just starting to open back up, so it was actually pretty hard to find an arcade that was open. So I ended up traveling a lot, but I found one, but it was actually kind of frustrating because the only one that I could find was clearly they had put a speed-up kit in it. So they had overclocked it, so I wasn't even playing the right, authentic Pac-Man right from the start. But I definitely made up for it later on. So let me just walk you through some of the things that I played, and this is not exhaustive. I thought very briefly about doing a version of this, this presentation that I literally walked through all 365 days, but I averaged that out, it's like 4-ish seconds per one, so that seemed kind of silly. So I'm just going to hit some of the highlights, but also just show you some of the breadth. So obviously I played lots of the arcade games, but I also played things like this, like the Coleco mini arcade, if you guys remember this, with these really annoying noises, and it's quite loud and there's no volume control, which I learned, when you live in a condo and you have neighbors above and below you who are also working from home, it was quite loud. But you've got this, they tried to make this to simulate, a miniature arcade experience. It's not an LCD technology, but I forget the acronym now. But that was fun, and I would keep my high score. So I kept whatever my high scores on those games, and I would post the high score. And those high scores were wildly different than the actual, regular game. Sega Game Gear, and you're probably wondering, so where did all these consoles come from? Some of them I bought, some of them I borrowed. I didn't steal any. And then I actually, when things started getting like, okay, you could travel a little more safely, I went to some friends' houses. For example, here's the Apple IIe, or the Apple II Miss Pac-Man. A friend of mine had, so if you see on the left side, that little sharp monitor, it is a CRT, but it's a flatter screen. I bought that at a pawn shop 3 days before I started this, because I didn't want to, I've got a big screen TV sitting over my mantle, like that wasn't going to work for me to film the stuff. I didn't want to use a capture card, because I was trying to be as authentic and sort of gritty as I could. So I needed a little TV that I could easily photograph or video. So I had this little thing, and I carried it friggin' everywhere, because it was small, so I could move it around and all that kind of stuff. It actually had a handle. So it was really nice. Best $20 I spent all pandemic, which is great. So Apple II, Miss Pac-Man. But then I played other things. This is technically a game. This is technically a Pac-Man game. This is the wonderful waterful Pac-Man. There's not a great way to keep score except that you win, right? If you remember this, you fill it up with the water, and then you have this mushy button on the bottom. You're like, shoo, 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 right? And that's the noise it makes. And you try and get all of the ghosts and the fruits and things into Pac-Man's mouth. Well, I played that, right? And I counted my score, whatever that means. Then I found things like this. Like this is a non-licensed Apple II Pac-Man game by StarCraft and Broderbund. But the interesting thing about this, and the reason I want to play this, is you think about the arcade version of Pac-Man, the screen is not horizontal, right? It's not 4x3, it's vertical. Well, their solution to this was, in the 80s, hey, if you want to play our game, just turn your monitor on the side. Like that was literally in the instructions. For a really authentic experience, turn your monitor on the side. So we turned the monitor on the side. I also played Atari 2600 Pac-Man. A lot of people have a lot of feelings about this game. Some of them are, maybe not so positive, not so negative. This is one of the versions I totally grew up with. So I played the heck out of it when I was a kid. I was fine. I was like, okay, it's Pac-Man, it's different, but I definitely played it. I did actually get an opportunity to talk in sort of extensive way with Todd Fry, who was the programmer of this, for the book. And I thought it was a very gentle yet maybe not a hot take, but at least an interesting one, maybe a different way to think about one of the games that people consider one of the worst Atari 2600 games. But it's on the list, so I totally played it. The Tomitronic Pac-Man. There's a theme with these sort of electronic games that they all make shrill, horrible noises when you play them. This one is one of those. This game's almost unplayable. It's very difficult. But look at my score, 178. I thought that was really good. But it was fun. I thought this was really interesting because the device sort of, you squint your eyes, it kind of feels like Pac-Man, or if Pac-Man got run over by, a steamroller or something. It's kind of that shape. But that's what I was looking at. Is like, the thing about the 80s, with licensing, especially with Pac-Man, but just really in general, it was sort of like the Wild West. Once Midway realized they had something that other companies wanted to license, there was all kinds of weird products. And they were pretty loose about what they were going to allow. And, it's not like today. I work with licensing and branding a lot, and people have these brand Bibles, and they're like, you must follow these instructions, these directions. Do not deviate from these colors from the character. That was not a thing for these guys in Pac-Man. So you get things like this. You're like, I don't really know what that is, but okay. But then I got to play cool things like Baby Pac-Man, which is this weird outlier. Bally Midway, Bally was the parent company of Midway, and they sort of started in pinball. Well, once they realized they had this really popular property in Pac-Man, they wanted to keep it going, right? And so the pinball team, which is separate from the arcade team, like, we want to get into the act. Let's do pinball as well. So this Baby Pac-Man is a combination video and pinball. And you'd be like, oh, it's great, it's the best of both worlds. No, it's like the worst of both worlds. Neither one is great. Like the pinball people don't like it, the video game people don't really like it. It's a beautiful cabinet, and it's a fun looking thing. It's got its quirks. I think this might have been the first combo video pinball game. So it's got that going for it. But I played that. And then I played these weird little cheap things that clearly are made not, overseas. You plug in an HDMI and you can play this Bandai Namco Flashback Blast. And it has some weird version of, it's probably the NES version of Pac-Man on this thing. But I tried it and you're like, oh, this controller's kind of garbagey. So I would rate these things and I would be honest, but I would try and play them all. So no, I'm not going to go through every single one. Here's the Atari 400, 800 Pac-Man, which is very good, actually. It's a pretty good version. This is sort of a deep cut. This is the Famicom, the Japanese NES, like the precursor to the NES, a game called Family Pinball, made by Namco at the time, and they just hit Pac-Man all over the place in this pinball game. Now, Pac-Man's not really in the game, but he's all over the game. So, it's this kind of stuff. I was trying to find these deep cuts. And then you got stuff like the Google Doodle. And the guy, one of the developers of this actually is now a friend of mine. And I reached out to him and I said, well, tell me about that. Because that was 2010. And so we talked about the process of trying to recreate. He really wanted to recreate Pac-Man, even though the maze is crazy. he wanted to recreate it as accurately as possible. So I played that, right, and that was still around. I remember there was a study when that came out. They measured the amount of time that people wasted that first week that this came out, like in the billions of lost dollars because of like lost productivity. Like, cause so many people are like, I'm totally gonna play that. And then there's sort of a masochistic side here. This is really small. My fingers are in their forescale, right? Those are not my children's fingers, which I think some of these other pictures have them. This is an actual size. That is about the size of a large postage stamp screen. It's very small. Now this was a mashup with Pac-Man and Hello Kitty, and of course they're like, wow, this is great. It's such a good game that we should make it so you can't see it, but you can play it. So that was kind of fun, and you'll see a theme here. But then I tried, I didn't just do old, weird, obscure things. I played Minecraft Pac-Man, and my kids are like, Dad, you're doing it wrong. They had to show me how to navigate through Minecraft, and there is a version of Minecraft or Pac-Man that you can play within Minecraft. It was like a digital add-on download. It was kind of fun, but it sort of made me a little seasick. But it's kind of cool. It's really interesting to see. Okay, now that we have 360 degrees, we have high resolution graphics. We're still going to build Pac-Man out of blocks, right? Okay. This is a detail of Mr. and Mrs. Pac-Man. This is another entry into pinball. Now, this is a straight-up pinball machine by Bally Midway. And for some reason, and I have not gotten anyone to give me a straight answer about this, is it was Mrs. Pac-Man. So suddenly, between Miss Pac-Man and this game, they tied the knot. Or at least maybe they just signed the paperwork. Maybe the paperwork was still going through. I don't really know. Maybe they had a fight. We don't know. We won't ask. But it's a cool pinball machine. I'm not a good pinball player, so I went really quickly. But it was kind of fun. I thought it was fun. The pinball people I know said they didn't really like it particularly, but it's a nice looking machine, and it's pretty fun. If you can track one of these down, it's pretty cool because from across the room, not only does it make it plays the Pac-Man theme from the cartoon, but it's super loud and sounds like Pac-Man. It's kind of fun. It's very bright, lots of colors, lots of flashing lights and everything. And then I find, just weird things like this. This is a pocket player Miss Pac-Man. If you feel the need to play Miss Pac-Man at any point and you're not going to do it on your phone, you can play it on this. And I think this plays one other game. But the screen was really nice. The buttons were okay. It wasn't bad. I'm getting near the end of this part, but Pac and Pal in the arcade, I play that. I think this game's frustratingly weird and difficult. There's a portion of the game where you get different keys and then it unlocks different gates. So like the whole mechanic of the game is very different. I don't actually like this game. Pack and Roll, this is very interesting. This is on the, what system? I'm blanking on what system that is. DS, thank you, which has the stylus. And Pack and Roll, you can use this little stylus to actually get Pac-Man to roll. And in this game, Pac-Man does not have feet or legs. He just is a sphere, and he rolls down these three-dimensional corridors and stuff. So you're rolling him, and you're trying to jump over things and speed. It's really cool. It's more interesting as an exercise, and I think it's actually a very fun game. But it's very different, so I think it's really interesting and it's well worth including. Pac-Man 256. This is a game where you guys are familiar. If you can get to the 256 board on Pac-Man, the game starts to basically come apart because it's complicated, it's technical, but basically there's a code issue that allows this thing to come apart. Well, somebody had the great idea, well, no, that's so cool, let's just turn it into a game, right? So you are Pac-Man and you can move throughout the maze, and then it's inevitable that the code just starts to overtake you. So it's like, how can you not die and how long can you survive until the code just kills you? It's kind of dark, it's sort of the pessimist view of Pac-Man, I guess. But it's interesting, again, and I was trying to be broad in my respect here. Games like Pac-Man Adventures in Time. This is a weird game. This is like a late 90s, early 2000s CD-ROM game. Okay. I went places, I played Pac-Man Basket. And what does this have to do with Pac-Man, you might ask? The balls are yellow. That's it. The balls are yellow. So that's me shooting baskets badly. And my wife, who was a former high school basketball player, she's trying not to laugh while taking pictures of me. Because that was pretty bad. That's why there's not a video here, it's just a static shot. This is the Tomy Pac-Man magnetic game. All of the pieces are magnetic, and you don't move the pieces so much as you tilt the board. and you try and use gravity and magnets to move you through this thing. It's almost impossible to play, but kind of fun and interesting. Pac-Man Championship Edition 2 is a modern version of Pac-Man. It is amazing. It's sort of Pac-Man on steroids. Really fun. I absolutely recommend, like, if you, whatever your modern platform is, this is a ton of fun and it's totally worth buying. It's just really, really good game. And it's sort of, don't do drugs, but it's Pac-Man on crack, right? And it's really, really fun. Visually, it feels that way. Like there's extra ghosts. The ghosts start to like line up, and there's like huge columns of ghosts. So it's really, really fun. Visually, it's really a feast for the eyes, but it still feels like Pac-Man. It's pretty fun. And then here's the rest of my family playing Pac-Man Battle Royale, which is the huge 4-player one. They set it up in, like, we were actually at the Pac-Man restaurant, so I was kind of killing a couple birds with one stone. And so they were playing, I was taking the pictures. And then this is a game that is actually, I think, going to disappear pretty quickly. It's on Google Stadia. It's called Pac-Man Mega Tunnel Battle, and basically a whole bunch of people can sign on, and your maze is right next to somebody else's maze. So at different points, the portals between those, if you look at the top right, unlock. So you can jump into someone else's maze and sort of cause havoc. You can eat them, you can eat their ghosts, you can do all kinds of things, lots of shenanigans, and each one of the puzzles has a different theme or a different style. It is really fun. It's really fun. And then Pac-Man 99 is an online multiplayer, somewhat similar to that. It's somewhat in between the last two games that I just showed. So that is a small sample of the games that I played. And everyone's like, oh, you probably got to be so good at Pac-Man by the end of this. No, not at all. Because the algorithms, the patterns, they don't cross over from game to game, right? Each one of these is different. I'm not an awesome Pac-Man player to start with. People are like, oh, you're going to be so good at the end of this. And it's like, no, that really didn't happen. But it was fun to just see these different takes, and you could feel it playing different versions, different approaches to the mazes, different approaches to the speed of Pac-Man, all those little nuances you really see. So, but what else did I learn? What are the big pictures other than there's a whole lot of Pac-Man games? There's a lot of Pac-Man games. I learned that like every time there's a new technology, thinking about 40 years, Pac-Man is always one of the first ones to appear in that new technology. So whatever it is, whether it's like a gimmick or whether it's like legitimately something that may be a game-changing video game technology, Pac-Man's there. Some examples: the tiny displays, the super tiny. Like, you're not going to put Doom on this screen. Well, maybe you will put Doom on that, but you're not going to put any other game on this, right? You can play this because even if you can't see it without a microscope, you kind of know how to play Pac-Man. You don't need any buttons, although this has buttons. You have this teeny tiny little joystick that I was sure was going to break off at any point. Tiny displays, or tinier displays. This is a huge zoom in. This thing's about the size of a credit card. So it's very small, and it's not fun to play something that small. But you know what? If you're going to try, you're going to put Pac-Man on it. In the 90s, when virtual reality was sort of coming around the first time, what was one of the first games that never got released, but what was like one of the first demos? It's Pac-Man, right? Everyone, because it's sort of a shared experience, because it's a simple gameplay, and people know it's fun. Well, instead of navigating both a new game and a new technology, we can sort of just navigate the new technology, and Pac-Man maps really well onto these new technologies. Like geolocation. This is another game, Pac-Man Geo. So basically, and I think this is still alive, I'm not sure, it's been a while. But wherever you are, especially if you're in a big city, you pull up Pac-Man Geo and it uses the geolocation data wherever you are, and you can play Pac-Man on the streets you're near. Right? Which is kind of crazy. So the screenshots I have is not Chicago, but it was really interesting. It was almost like, this isn't quite ready for prime time, but I thought it was a very interesting idea. And again, you can do Pac-Man because there's a lot here to navigate. You can go to someone's maze, if they're in New York, they've made a New York maze, you can also play there, right? So it's like when people are out there, like more of these mazes theoretically are supposed to be mapped. And then there's things like the world's largest Pac-Man. This is just a marketing speak for a gigantic screen, which is about maybe half of this screen vertically, really, really large. And it's actually very difficult to play because you cannot get far enough away from it to see the whole thing. But you can definitely play it, and you can play multiple players at the same time. So what else did I learn? Well, I learned some practical things, right? One of the things I learned is unless I wanted to purchase or borrow every single console ever, sometimes I had to get creative about how I was going to play. And I really didn't want to use very much emulation. I was going to try and do that as little as possible if I literally just couldn't get my hands on the game. But sometimes I had to get a little creative. Like this. This is the Super Retro Advance adapter for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. So I was playing a Game Boy Advance cartridge on the Super Retro Advance adapter on the Super NES. Right? So and it was that kind of shenanigans, like hardware shenanigans. I'm using adapters and I'm using, 10 different kinds of cables, all sorts of things to try and make this work while I'm in my condo, right? So what else did I learn? I also learned that I needed like heavy duty retro tech support. I didn't just fall off the turnip truck, but I'm not an IT engineer. So a lot of times I needed help. But what I found is it was not, you would think that, it's the old games, it's the old consoles, you have to get them working. No, I had zero problems with any cartridge I ever used. No problem, and nothing that some isopropyl alcohol on a Q-tip couldn't fix. But when I got to modern consoles, modern, I'll put that in quotes, this is what I saw. The disc could not be read. The disc could not be read. I cursed the PS2 many times because I had a whole bunch of PS2 games that I just couldn't play. And was it the disc? Was it the laser? Was it the laser alignment? Was it me rebooting it? Was it the disc? I bought many versions of different discs because they were pretty cheap. I also bought stupid things like this, like a disc polisher. And a disc polisher is just pig Latin for Tim moves his arm really, really fast with a sponge and some water. That's what this thing basically was. And it had great Amazon reviews and it did absolutely nothing. So eventually, I think I went through 3 or 4 different, I bought 2 different PS2s. I took one back, I tried to get one serviced, then I just borrowed my brother's. I got it out of storage, and eventually I was able to play those games. But it was a horrifying experience, and thank you, Sony. Other weird things I did. I ate some strange food. There's cereal involved. I did eat 40-year-old gum, and I failed at making Pac-Man origami. Right, so at some point you're like, wow, you're really grasping for things to do here. No, I was actually really trying to broaden the thought of this because it's not like I thought of Pac-Man origami. It was just a Google search away, and I had lots of things to choose from. Now, you ask me, Tim, are you good at making origami? The answer is absolutely not. Absolutely not, but I tried, right? And that's sort of the point. Let's see if this video will play. I wasn't playing earlier. This is my kids from 2 years ago, and I did not coerce them. They were doing this voluntarily, and eating 40-year-old Pac-Man cereal that had not been opened. So it was a sealed bag, and we ate it together. I ate it first, just to make sure it was safe, and then I filmed them eating it. Let's see if this will work. It doesn't look like the video is working. That's a bummer, but that's okay. But their end result was my daughter said thumbs middle. That's, ish. I don't know if that's a thing, but she says thumbs middle. And my son said thumbs up. But he asked, do I have to enjoy it? And I was like, no, you don't have to enjoy it. But they did eat it. They didn't die. They didn't even get sick. Now, contrast that with me opening up a pack of Pac-Man cards that had never been opened and eating the gum. I did get sick. I did not recommend that. I don't know that I'd recommend eating it when it's fresh. But that did not go over so well.
They look like doggy pellets.
They look like puppy pellets.
Okay, do I have to take a bite?
Yeah.
Is the video filming?
Yes.
Oh shit. I know almost never eat cereal.
All right. 1, 2,
You have to enjoy.
3.
You have to enjoy.
Good. Marshmallows taste cold.
I know it's because of the milk.
No.
Good?
Yeah.
Pac-Man cereal?
No.
There you go. There's the truth. So then we did some other interesting things like, people have just done this. You go on Etsy and you look up Pac-Man craft or something like that. We bought Pac-Man molds for making candy. So you can make suckers with these. We ended up just making basically melted chocolate medallions. and we colored them, Pac-Man ghost colors. And it was just fun stuff. So it was actually a really fun way for me and my kids, and of course this was the kind of their gateway drug to video games. Now they, 2 years later, they don't want anything to do with Pac-Man, they have their own games, but this really got them into this. They wanted to play every game that I played, but we got to do a lot of fun things together, and during a time when it's like, things kind of look a little dark, it was actually a really fun thing to do together. Again, this is I will not show you video of me trying to do origami. It was a sight to behold, I'll tell you. But I was totally willing to eat other weird things too. Like this took months to get here. This was a shimi choco corn. I still don't really know what it is exactly, except that it comes from Japan, and it was it looked and sort of tasted like chocolate dog biscuits. But as I spared no expense, do anything for you guys. And sometimes we just had fun with that. We just make, this is a Pac-Man cheesecake, obviously. So one of the other things, like some of this stuff's just goofy, right? But some of it's also fun, and I was thinking that, I wanted to write a book about the history of Pac-Man. So this year was also an opportunity to take a deep dive into the history and look at not just what we already kind of knew about Pac-Man, things like, the main creator of Pac-Man is Toru Iwatani in Japan. But I also got to learn a lot of other things. I'm from Chicago, born there, still live there. Chicago is a huge part of Pac-Man's history, whereas Midway, which basically brought Pac-Man over, they didn't just bring a Japanese game to the United States. They shepherded it there, right? And they saw something that other people did not see, a game that really didn't do that well in Japan. They brought it over, they didn't modify the game, but they modified everything around it in terms of the art and the marketing and the promotion of it, and they made it a huge hit. And so for me, it's like that was a bit of local history, but even video game history that runs right through Chicago, and it was huge. This was the best-selling arcade game of all time in the United States. They sold almost 100,000 cabinets, in that first year and a half. So it was really huge, and it wasn't just because Pac-Man's a great game. There is not a if you build it, they will come kind of thing. It was very much they marketed it and they understood a little bit of what they had. So it was really important for me to understand those things. Other things like Popeye. You guys know that Popeye has a super influential part in Pac-Man history. You think about what happens to Popeye in basically every cartoon or every strip. Popeye's on the ropes, figuratively and literally. Bluto's about to, beat the crap out of him. What's going to happen? He's, it's not looking good for Popeye. Then he eats spinach. He turns the tables. He gets super strong. Now he's the one who, is going to take the fight to him. That's Pac-Man. That's what happens in Pac-Man. And that's where Toru Iwatani got the idea of the Energizers. Pac-Man is being chased by the ghosts. He's on the ropes. He's in trouble. He eats a power pellet. Boom. Now he's the one who can eat. That's where it comes from. And it was that kind of digging, that sort of level that, it took it with. But then also, if you guys know anything about me, I'm a designer by trade as well, so the visual stuff is always very important to me. But even understanding who are the people who designed things like the art for the original Pac-Man, and I got a chance to learn more about him. He actually passed away not that long ago. But was able to quote him, was able to connect with him and see some of the art that he did. But also people like the man behind, you guys seen this on the side of the Pac-Man cabinet. What is that? Is that Pac-Man? It's this really weird version of Pac-Man. And up until we were doing research for this book, didn't really know who that was. But now we're pretty certain, I'm using the royal we, I'm pretty certain that it was pinball artist Gordon Morrison, who'd done a lot of work and done some freelance work for Midway, and we believe that he was the one who did the side art and the kick plate art on the Pac-Man cabinet, which is kind of cool. But one of the things I said I like about Pac-Man is that everybody had their own take on Pac-Man. In an era where you weren't going to keep things all the same, there wasn't a desire to keep it all consistent. You saw a lot of different versions of Pac-Man. So you have people like Stan Jarocchia, who I mentioned, who was the VP of marketing at Midway, and he was really the person who was championing Pac-Man. If not for him, Midway would not have licensed Pac-Man. He saw something in that game, he brought it, he insisted that that was a game they were going to license. But then he was also very instrumental in making Miss Pac-Man. And another story, it's in the book, we can talk more about it after if you like, but he's the guy on the right with the afro, I'm sorry, it's not an afro, it's a perm technically. But really nice guy, he's still around, he's in his 90s. You know, when I talked to him just a little while back, super sharp, really nice guy. Really appreciated like what he was able to do, you know, just in the history of video games. But also, he's awesome at correcting me when I have my facts wrong, which is really great, which I really appreciate. And there's just fun stuff like this. I was talking about, yeah, that's Pac-Man. This is the building. They say the house that Pac built was basically Pac-Man and Miss Pac-Man were so successful that Midway had to build a whole other building to hold all their manufacturing and all the growth that they had. And so these are the machines out there, and that is supposed to be a Pac-Man costume. Again, very free to open to interpretation. Who knows where that came from? But that's right outside of Chicago. But then, you know, in the 80s, Pac-Man and Miss Pac-Man were sort of minor Chicago celebrities. This was the 150th birthday of Chicago. And of course, they have Pac-Man and Miss Pac-Man there. And in fact, they had, the mayor gave the president of Valley the key to the city and things like that. That's Chicago style, right? You know, we're not going to give it to any humanitarian. We're going to give it to the businessman, right? But you know, just fun stuff like that to learn. I mean, this photo is amazing. Some of those people are Midway employees who worked on Pac-Man and worked with Stan Jarocki, and that's downtown Chicago. It's just fun to see that stuff. And then just cool stuff like this. This is the Mr. and Mrs. Pac-Man art. Again, she's a Mrs. I don't see a ring. I don't know if she should ask him about that. But, you know, those things that I learned, you know, Pac-Man was huge. Stan Jarocki, Gordon Morrison, Midway. Then one other thing, and then I want to open it up to some questions. I'll leave a few minutes for questions. The merch. You know, one of the big things that the reasons that Pac-Man has had the kind of staying power that it did is because they licensed this property to the hilt. And it was really the first real licensing done for a video game property. There were, you know, these guys were video game makers. They weren't licensors, but they learned it pretty quickly. And as I'll paraphrase what one of the licensing guys at Midway said, it said, if your idea didn't offend us, and we weren't offended by much, we would give you the license. Right? One of the things that I sadly was not able to find, they actually prototyped a Pac-Man toilet seat. Let me just demonstrate what that maybe would look like. Right? There was a prototype, and one of the guys who worked at Midway took it home, and he toilet trained his kids on it. This never made it into production, but I think there's a horrifying aspect to that maybe traumatized small children. Pac-Man's hungry. That's all I'll say about it. But you see this, I mean, this is right out of a 80s catalog. I mean, there was Pac-Man bed sheets and sleeping bags and lunch boxes and board games and, I mean, you know, records, name it, right? There's so much stuff. So, and it's not all vintage either. You see like a Pac-Man phone, you see scary Pac-Man finger puppets. I was able to buy all sorts of Pac-Man, modern Pac-Man merch. This is a Rubik's Cube Pac-Man augmented reality hoodie. So if you download an app, when I was wearing this, you could point your phone at me and weird things would happen. I mean, that's kind of goes without saying, but more weird than normal. You know, it had all sorts of graphics and things like that. Then you have like vintage adult-sized Pac-Man sleeping bags. This is a full adult female. This is not a small sleeping bag. The less questions I ask, the better off I think I am. Pac-Man shoes. These are vintage Keds. You've got kind of crazy, glittery Pac-Man t-shirts. That's very scary. That's a cool shirt. These are not mine. These were not given to me. Someone sent me the pictures of their underwear. That doesn't normally happen either, but that happened in this case. It's not children's underwear either. Yeah, exactly. I'm not going to ask. You guys think Halloween it is? Come on, now is that not a great Pac-Man costume? Who doesn't want a plastic mask with that, that elastic band that cuts off the circulation to your head, and plastic smock with your face pictured on the front of it? But you want to talk about really scary? These are horrifying. No comments. Yeah, these are exactly. Yes, I can't imagine being a kid and turning off the lights, and having this be in my room. It's like Poltergeist, right? Is this thing gonna pull me under the bed? But also Pac-Man, Pac-Man soap. So the ghosts are soap, and Pac-Man is a very poorly constructed sponge. But great packaging. I mean, beautiful, beautiful packaging. Who doesn't want the bathing arcade? So what did I learn? I learned that apparently there's no end to Pac-Man merchandise applications, and not all ideas are created equal, and not all ideas are good. But there's still something here. Pac-Man persists in our popular culture. You know, one of the things that I noticed is that when a company didn't know what to do, or maybe they're trying to capture some sort of cool, the kids are into it, street cred, they would do that, right? And that started from the very beginning with Pac-Man Fever. That was not a licensing tie-on at first. That was very much, these guys thought Pac-Man was cool, let's make a Pac-Man song. They did it, and they got a gold record for it. That's amazing. It's Buckner and Garcia. Really nice guys. Well, very nice, and the guy who was one of them, the duo who's still alive, was very helpful. They even licensed the song to us, so we have a yellow record in the deluxe edition of the book. It's the first time that it's been pressed in vinyl since the early 80s, which is kind of cool. But, if you guys remember this commercial, that is Pac-Man as well, in a 7-Up commercial. It's kind of a crazy, YouTube this one. It's pretty nuts. But you've got things like, Pixels. Maybe not a great movie. This might be the best part of the movie. Budweiser did a Bud Light Super Bowl ad with Pac-Man. What's the brand connection? I don't know. But that's okay. That doesn't stop BMW from using Pac-Man to announce the new cars. It doesn't stop Katy Perry from putting Pac-Man all over her stage show. And it definitely doesn't stop Caterpillar from putting Pac-Man in announcing their new Earth movers. So, I guess. So the question is, how is that relevant? But I would say Pac-Man lends an odd retro cred to brands, right? So, and that is something that will continue to happen as long as Pac-Man remains even slightly relevant. So, the wrap up. This exercise was sort of a testament in creativity and longevity and the power of Pac-Man, not just the game, but also the character. So, it was an odyssey, it was something fun that I wanted to share. It was a different way to do this. If I didn't already write a book about Pac-Man, maybe I would have written a book about this, but I just want to share a little bit of that experience with you guys. So, thank you. We have about 3 minutes for questions. If anybody has a question, if you want to hop up to the mic.
I was just wondering, did you watch any of the cartoons?
I watched all of the cartoons.
How did the kids like them?
They actually I was surprised. I thought they'd have higher standards. No, they actually liked it. They actually liked it a lot. And it was actually pretty fun. I think the interesting thing about the cartoon is there was not a lot of storytelling in the games. So they made up these storylines, as weird as they were, out of whole cloth. And it was very interesting to see what they actually made. So, and how some of that sort of seeped into the games later on. So, an important part of the Pac-Man mythos in some ways. It's a great question.
I had just double checked on my phone, and there is a live action Pac-Man movie in the works. Are you gonna see it or wait see what the reaction is?
I will totally see it, and I volunteer. If they need a Pac-Man expert, I'm happy to consult. My fees are very reasonable.
Well, hopefully it turns out like Sonic the Hedgehog, because I didn't love the first movie, but I liked it, and then I saw this year's Sonic the second movie, and I really dug that they did a good job with Knuckles, making him kind of like Drax, and they did a good job with Tails, and I thought the Sonic 2, I know it's a different one, but real quick, Sonic 2 did a really good job of improving and having a lot more Easter eggs and references and being an overall better movie than the first one.
Totally. I think the Sonic movies are kind of the video game gold standard at this point. I think they did a
they don't have a great record. So.
Yeah, they need.
I'm a huge Uncharted fan too, and we finally got an Uncharted movie, and it was decent enough. But I really hope the sequel can improve and have Elena Fisher and be even better and recreate certain stuff from the games, like some of the set pieces.
Cool. Thanks for the question.
Hi. So, Hangly Man was one of my favorite hacks of Pac-Man.
Yes.
That was around my house a lot growing up. And then I saw Pac-Man Plus. So my real question is that, because that seems like that's the first licensed hack.
Yes.
Versus the other ones just hacks or unlicensed. So, but I look at the copyright and it's around the same time as Ms. Pac-Man. So have you ever dug into or found out how those coexisted, or if they were being worked on by different teams? And-
So they were set. So the question is were things like Pac-Man Plus, was that separate from Miss Pac-Man? And yes, they were totally separate, worked on by totally different groups. Pac-Man Plus was an answer to Hangly Man and like some of these other hacks. Like
Okay.
they went, you know what? Can't beat them, join them. Let's make an official one so
Okay.
they can use it. But then Miss Pac-Man was envisioned as a hack, and then it turned into something altogether else. And we can talk about it more. I go into it extensively in the book.
Okay.
But yes, absolutely.
So same time frame, but maybe Ms. Pac-Man just came in when they were already kind of doing their hack?
Yeah, that was already in progress, and this ended up being a totally separate thing.
Okay, cool.
Great question.
Thanks.
Hey, Joe.
Hey, thank you, sir.
Hey, how you doing? Okay, one thing I've always wondered, and you know, I've done artwork on 3 Pac-Man games, including Pac-Man Plus. Which, why was it never standardized? Why was it characters ever I mean, 3 different games, and I've done 3 different characters on all 3 of them. They didn't. Yeah, what the hell?
Well, you know what? I think it's the nature of the licensing, right? Because it was a Japanese game licensed in the United States, but they still had to run everything by them. You know, and I think you have different teams giving different bits of input, and then there's outside factors like the cartoon. You know, the cartoon didn't exist at first, and then when the cartoon gets popular, they're saying, well, you know what? We should lean into the cartoon. Maybe let's make the characters look more like the cartoons. So there's you know, in the absence of a style guide, it was like, well, we're going to jump on whatever we have at that moment. You know, and so that's why you've got to draw 3 different versions.
They told me just do whatever the hell you want.
Yeah.
You know, really. I mean, when I did Pac-Man Plus, I had like little Mickey Mouse gloves, and they said, no, you gotta look like the mouse, man. You know?
Yeah, don't get sued by Disney.
Right, you know, so you ended up with the welder gloves and the biker boots.
Which is always a good look.
Right, yeah, right. But still, it was always, I've always meant to ask you that, though, so, yeah, no, I did.
Yeah, no, thanks.
Just so people know who you
Yes, Paul. So,
Next
so,
panel.
Step on your thing.
yeah, so Paul, you should talk to Paul after this. He was actually actively involved in multiple Pac-Man games and doing some of the artwork, some of the typography. So he's a man who's touched Pac-Man in all the appropriate ways.
I actually invented the first Pac-Man.
Yes. Awesome.
So this is following up on your comment about Pac-Man being one of the first things on all this stuff, because when they put games on the iPod, it was one of the 10 launch games on the iPod.
Yes.
And I was working at Namco, you know this, he interviewed me about this, but we turned in the game and they never let us change anything in the game. But then they came back and said, the Steve doesn't know how to play it, and we need to add a tutorial level to it. And the only time we were ever allowed to modify Pac-Man was because the Steve couldn't play it.
And you guys know the Steve Jobs, of course. Yeah. Steve Jobs apparently spent all the 80s building Apple computer instead of playing Pac-Man. So maybe that was a good thing for all of us, I don't know. Awesome, thanks Maurice. And thank you guys for coming, thanks for all the questions.
Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and to the right are the playlist of the Portland Retro 2022 and some other interesting videos. Thank you.